Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. I'm James Baggett, founder of Car Dealer Magazine, and today on the show I'm delighted to be chatting to Paul Stokes from GForces. Good afternoon, Paul.
Good afternoon, James. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Thank you very much for joining us, Paul. So I'll just give you a quick intro for those who don't know you. Paul is head of e-commerce for GForces and has been for the last 2 years. He works on their online retailing platform, really working out what's best for car buyers when it comes to buying online. Paul's got some fantastic experience in this. In a previous life, he was managing director of Rockart, which we'll go on to in some detail in a moment. That must have been a fascinating place to work, so I'm looking forward to hearing about that. But also, he's been an MD of a multi-franchise group, Nidvale Motor Group, after a management buyout, which he led there. They're a 100 million turnover group, and he's been a brand director for people like JCT 600, among others. I can't say enough what a font of knowledge Paul has become when it comes to online retailing. So if you've got any questions and you're watching on YouTube, feel free to submit them. My team will forward them through to me, and if they're relevant, I'll ask Paul. Paul, so intro done. Let's talk a little bit about your experience. I mean, firstly, I'm not sure where you want to start, but let's go with the most relevant one. Let's start talking about Rockart and how that set you up to do what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I was very fortunate, very privileged to be involved in that business with Simon Dixon from the outset of really the startup of the company. And prior to that, I'd been sort of in the motor trade 26 years prior to that at various sort of roles. But this concept that Simon wanted to bring to the marketplace was really quite visionary in a sense of that it wanted to turn the customer experience on its head. So I joined the business at the beginning of 2014. Fair to say it was a true traditional startup. We didn't have any franchise agreements in place. We didn't have any stores trading. It was very much around, getting the proposition principles in place, doing what I would call the beauty parade with obviously the manufacturers, and really trying to get someone on board in terms of who would want to then go with us as far as that concept was concerned. We were very fortunate in a sense that Hyundai came on board, understood really what we were trying to achieve as a business. First store opened in November 14, but prior to that, we really had sort of 10 months of what I call scoping what we wanted to achieve in that store in terms of the environment, what we wanted to achieve in terms of the customer experience, and how really important the part of technology was actually going to play in terms of that customer experience.
Paul, in a nutshell, for those people who might not know what the Rockart solution was, perhaps we could just explain how it works, because they were set up in large shopping centres. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the whole proposition principle was centred around you could go into one of the stores, of which there were two. There was 2 Hyundai stores and there was a Jaguar Land Rover store in probably 2 of the largest shopping centres in Europe. One was in Bluewater and one was in Westfield in Stratford. And the whole concept was that you could either transact in store or actually you could seamlessly transact online as well. So it really was very much focusing on that omni-channel strategy of put the customer in control, allow them to come into the store, allow them to have that interaction with someone over the experience, mainly centered around brand and product knowledge, and then allow them to just go through that process of buying the car as and when it suited them.
So remind me how it progressed, that solution. I mean, what happened to it in the end? Is it still going?
Yeah, so I left the business. I was with the business for three years. As I left the business, the 2 Hyundai stores were still trading. The Jaguar Land Rover store still trades today very successfully. That works out of the Stratford shopping centre in Westfield. I understand the 2 Hyundai stores were actually delivered back to Hyundai after I left. But when I take into account and think about really the concept of that, it wasn't just around retailing in that environment. It was very much around brand awareness as well. And when you look at the 2 brands that were involved in that concept with us, that was really quite centric to what was also being delivered in terms of that experience. You think 28 million visitors that used to come to Bluewater on an annual basis. That's showing that there's an awful lot of people that are getting used to having effectively a car dealer in a shopping centre environment. Very, very different. It's tried and tested and has been done for many years. Obviously, there's pop-ups that have been put in place in shopping centres. But what I guess set this apart was really that this was a transactional store. This was a store whereby customers could go in, they could transact there and then if they wanted to. It wasn't all around inquiry generation or lead generation. It was very much you can come onto the piece of technology, you can utilize the technology, and you can transact. So
did it work?
I'm going to be biased. Of course, it worked. It did. I think there's a lot of people in the industry in terms of wanting to understand the proof of concept. Was it successful? Without question, it was. I mean, I remember the first day when we opened the store, and a customer came in, a young couple, and they browsed and they bought a car there and then. So I think what it actually gave was a different thought process for the customer in terms of perhaps the traditional buying method. And certainly for some customers, that really appealed.
So, and also you've got some fantastic experience. I mean, that management buyout must have really taught you some lessons. I mean, tell me a little bit about that. I mean, before we go on to the real nitty gritty of the online world.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I started off life back in the early 90s. I worked for Vauxhall Motors originally. I did 7 years with those in a sales and marketing function. I was a sales district manager. I was really fortunate as well to work in their motors holding division. And in fact, actually brought back memories yesterday when you had Simon on, because I used to actually look after Sherwoods as one of those motors holding dealers. So it's quite interesting to hear Simon talk. I then spent obviously time at Vauxhall, but I'd got the retailing bug. I think I'd worked so closely to retailers in that motors holding environment. I could actually see myself jumping into that sort of side of the business, which I did. I left after 8 years with Vauxhall, moved over into retail, had the opportunity to work with some great industry leaders, Sir Peter Vardy and Simon Dixon. I worked at both those PLCs when they were trading. But then the opportunity for the buyout came up, and I sort of jumped at that, if I'm being honest. I was very privileged again to be given consideration for it. I joined as commercial director. It was a multi-franchise group at the time. We expanded then that group over a 7-year period. We added on other franchises across multi-franchise locations. And that taught me, I guess, an awful lot about automotive business, from the point of view of strategy, finance, marketing, people. Plenty of headaches as well along the way, lots of debt. Went through credit crunch in 2008. That was an interesting time. But again, really sort of, I guess, armed me with what I call the toolbox that you can carry around and then transfer those skills as well. So,
I mean, with that sort of experience, you must be looking now to the future and how the industry is going to change with quite some excitement, I'm sure. So tell me a little bit about your role now at GForces and why you joined the company and effectively left the retailing world.
Yeah, it's a question I get asked all the time, to be honest. And I think it was right opportunity, right time, if I had to sum it up sort of quite succinctly. GForces, obviously, I've known the guys for sort of pretty much 10 years. I'd watched with interest in terms of what they've been doing as a business. They were going through, obviously, a strategy rethink in terms of what they needed to deliver in terms of solutions in the ever-changing market. E-commerce was very centric to the delivery of that strategy. I obviously had a background in that, and really sort of working with them, and have done for the last sort of 2.5 years now. Very, very closely association relationship with the exec board. And it really has been around taking that strategy and that vision and then bringing it to market and delivering it. And that's the product that we see today. Having tremendous success, over the last sort of 18 months, we've launched over 100 sites, e-commerce sites. And really, I guess, going through a process of not just discovery in terms of what best practice and good looks like, but the insight and learning that we then get out of those transactional and trading platforms has been phenomenal. And my role really is to continue to monetize that, to make sure that it does stay best in class, and really to just continually develop it, as we go along the way.
We spoke to Tim Smith a couple of weeks ago about the nitty gritty of these sites, or actually why dealers would need an online transaction on their website. But I know you're very close to actually how dealers can get the best out of it once they've put it in place. I mean, perhaps we could just go through some of those kind of golden nuggets of information that dealers of all shapes and sizes might find useful when doing this online. Yeah,
sure, absolutely. And I think for me, James, one of the things to consider with this is that when you bring to life a transactional automotive platform, you have got to think about other industries. When I say other industries that do it well. We all know about Amazon. We all know that they really set the benchmark in terms of e-commerce and being transactional. And that should be no different, in our opinion, as far as automotive is concerned. A couple of things to really think about are, if a customer needs to transact and buy a car online, you've got to give them the trust and you've got to build the confidence with them to do that. How do you do that? You've got to provide those tools actually within the solution set itself. What type of things do you need to consider in terms of that? Data privacy is absolutely key. And it's one of the things that we focused an awful lot on in terms of the scope and the discovery and the bringing the solution to marketplace. And it's quite interesting, actually. The other week I was reading a trusted shopper survey, and that one of the must-have features on any e-commerce site, ranking at 84%, was data privacy. And if you think about that logically from a consumer's perspective, consumers are going to go online, they're going to transact on an automotive website, they're going to give away their personal data. They're going to input their card details, whether it be debit or credit card. They're going to provide data in terms of things around finance application. You know, all of that has to have key consideration. And one of our, I guess, key thought processes was, we really need to make sure that that is absolutely 100% what we call baked inside the native dealer website platform, because it comes back to that point of, you know, building that trust and building that empathy with the customer and give them the confidence to then transact. Compliance is another big issue to consider as well. So compliance, again, we've worked with all of the finance compliance companies, all of the financial insurance compliance companies over the last sort of 2.5 years, and really making that journey compliant from an FCA treating customers fairly point of view, but also making sure there's the right balance in terms of not confusing the customer too much with what we call legal jargon.
So you're going back to a dealership now. You've been on furlough, or you've been running your business from home. You've seen that there is a move to online. You need to plan for the future. If you're running a dealership, what do you do when it comes to reopening the showroom and bringing staff back? How do you do that?
I think for us, and we talk about this pretty much every day as a business, is the landscape's changed. The consumer landscape has changed, whichever way we want to cut it. And it was changing prior to COVID-19, but it's probably just fast-tracked, you know, almost at 100 mile an hour further forward. Key consideration would need to be infrastructure of sales teams, in my opinion. We've run for all too many years on a lead generation model, whereby we encourage the customer to come onto the website. We drive traffic to those websites, and then we ask the customer to inquire by way of filling in an inquiry form, or whether that's a live chat interaction, or whether that's a telephone call. That's going to change. That's going to change, we think, quite dramatically in terms of the way that that inquiry now needs to be dealt with. There's probably going to have to be far more digital interaction around that inquiry once that inquiry is submitted. And probably more so as well, an understanding of how the consumer wants that inquiry and that interaction to take place. Do they want it to be on different mediums, for example? Do they want to use Messenger? Do they want to use, perhaps, say, Zoom? You know, Zoom. We live on Zoom at the moment, and as I'm sure, you know, other customers that are buying cars, working for businesses, they will now become in tune and used to it. So I think there's a whole consideration within, if you're going to look at online and you're going to structure a team, there probably needs to be a reallocation of thought process. And I think with that, probably a reallocation of competency around the type of people that are going to be able to adapt to that new way of obviously dealing with that inquiry.
The other thing that's probably going to have to change are the processes, surely. I mean, if salesmen are going to be dealing with customers in different way, be it on the phone first, or via video chat, or on a Zoom call like this, they're going to have to change the way that they've dealt with customers completely, surely.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, James, with that is it's more so understanding how the customer wants that interaction to take place. You know, as I say, come back to the traditional method of, you know, filling in an inquiry form. Typically what the customer is going to get is they're going to get a phone call, depending upon obviously the marketing preferences. But again, we could go down a completely different tack in that, do those marketing preferences really all the time get adhered to? I'll give a prime example. My wife bought a car 7 or 8 weeks ago. She clearly marked that she wanted email interaction. She was forced to put a telephone number on an inquiry form, and guess what? She got phone calls. She didn't want phone calls. She wanted to have purely an email interaction. So I think there's got to be more acceptance and understanding that consumers will want to deal more digitally, and will want to probably deal, certainly under social distancing, will want to deal more at distance.
I mean, I find that just as frustrating as your wife probably does. You know, you're asking inquiries on a live chat and the phone rings.
Yes.
Well, when it comes to dealerships, what do you think they should be using as a primary method of communicating with these people? Do customers want live chat, or do they want it via a WhatsApp message, or is there another form that they should be doing? Is there a gold standard?
I think, I mean, if we tick them off, I guess. So live chat is incredibly important in terms of interaction. But I always got told many years ago, live chat done well can support your business. Live chat done poorly means you'll probably never see the customer again. So I think there has to be that fine balance in terms of certainly when live chat is surfaced through that consumer journey, and actually, again, the competency actually behind that live chat. So that's a fundamentally important part of the process. And actually, if you link that back to online, customers do want just probably confirmation of certain parts of the journey. They want to ask perhaps the most simplistic of question. Live chat offers a great medium for that. I think when it comes to other methods, we've got clients that are testing the water with things like WhatsApp. And actually, we've got one client which I thought was quite interesting the other week. They've now offered customers the opportunity to do Zoom calls. Now, some clients will probably not appreciate doing it that way. They perhaps will have a certain sort of thought process behind it. But again, it comes back to me in terms of the thought process is what does the customer want in terms of that interaction? There's plenty of tools that can be used. You know, the use of video and sending video content to the customer, vitally important. You know, customers have got plenty of time that they can browse in terms of, you know, looking on the classifieds, looking on CarWow, you know, doing all their own research. But when it comes down to the actual physical vehicle that they're showing an interest in at the dealer, you know, that's got to be specific around that particular vehicle. And, you know, video content to the customer is very powerful.
What about times that they should be doing this? I mean, are dealers going to have to staff their dealerships completely different on a shift system that covers well into 10, 11 o'clock at night?
I think traditionally, again, as an industry, we've worked to, I'm going to say, fairly draconian ways in terms of a sales department functions from 9 till 7 typically on a, you know, perhaps a Monday to a Saturday, you know, slightly less hours on a Sunday. But that doesn't typically fit into a customer's browsing time. So what we're tending to find with our clients that are looking at online and looking at how they deal with those digital interactions, size dependent, is they'll set up centralized teams. They'll set up a centralized digital response team or customer care team that does work different hours outside of those traditional business hours. We've got one client, again, very successfully sets it up that they work from 10 till 11 o'clock at night. They staff it with part-time individuals. And actually what they also allow is they allow remote working, which I think is probably where we're going to end up going to in terms of, you know, having to man those extended hours, that you don't necessarily need to be in the dealership to have that interaction with the customer. And the one point about digital interaction as well, I think, is it's all about speed of response. You know, you've got to react to the speed with which the customer wants that question answered, whether it be on live chat or how quickly you can turn around that digital inquiry. You know, I saw some stats as well many months ago that, you know, if you leave it more than 24 hours to contact a customer, you probably, the likelihood is you won't get hold of that customer because someone will have got there before you. So,
what about when it comes to rewarding salespeople? I mean, a commission and furlough has been a massive debate that we've had in the industry and covered extensively on Car Dealer magazine.
yes.
What about when it goes forward in the future? Do you think when you're selling online in this way, salespeople should be rewarded in the same way as they always have been? Or is it now a salaried job where they're experts on the product and they're just guiding those customers along? What would you do if you were setting up a dealership?
Yeah, so, I mean, my thoughts on it would be quite simply, you've got to look at what part has the sales exec actually played in the processing of that transaction. And, you know, we're seeing this through our platform at the moment. The amount of transactions that go through whereby there is no interaction. The customer has freely gone onto a website, they've browsed, they've configured their own quotation, you know, they've chosen certain extras in their shopping basket from a checkout perspective, and they've undertaken then their own finance application. And you think to yourself, I guess, you know, what type of person then needs to deal with that customer once that transaction has taken place? And I would say it's probably not a salesperson. It's probably not a salesperson in terms of the competencies that salesperson has, because there's no selling then involved in that transactional process. So my opinion would be you'd probably have, yes, a different pay plan in terms of digital advisors. You may still bonus it, but you may bonus it around more customer-centric measures or customer experience measures from a feedback perspective. But as far as commission schemes are concerned, I think probably the overriding factor would be an overhaul of those in terms of the way those teams would then be structured.
What about upsell opportunities? How do you work that into an online sale? I mean, it's often a big proportion of the revenue that dealers bring in. There'll be some that are scared that they're going to lose that. I mean, what would your advice be on that front?
Yeah, so we get asked this question all the time whenever we sort of push sites live or whenever we're talking to customers about consideration of e-commerce. So there's the ability within our platform to include what we call the non-insured back extras. So your things like your paint protections, your simple accessories, your uninsured back warranties on used cars. They can really simply be included in that checkout environment where the customer then just can elect to tick and then that add them to their basket. Where it gets a little bit more complex is around the insured back products, things like gap or tire and alloy insurance. And that's going to take probably a little bit more thought process in terms of the actual customer journey, because there's a requirement, obviously, from a needs and demands perspective. There's a requirement to understand how those products should be offered to the customer. We're keen to incorporate that, obviously, into our solution set. As to how they're dealt with now, pretty much as they are in the traditional method, they would be dealt with in the offline environment. And I would suggest that those digital teams or those digital specialists will still have those discussions around those products with the consumer prior to obviously the handover of the vehicle taking place.
I suppose the issue with these things online is they're effectively barriers, aren't they, to completing that transaction? And it's a bit like when you keep getting offered upgrades when you're buying something from Amazon or similar. I suppose that the actual key reason they're there is to buy a car, and those additional things you should probably be doing over the phone. I mean, AO did it when I bought some stuff for my kitchen, and they called me afterwards to try and sell it, but the actual transaction was very easy to do online. Is that going to be the same with cars?
Yeah, and I think again, if we link it back and think about the traditional method of buying a car, and I've been involved in this, I've worked in that environment. We don't just sell the car to the customer; we sell a package of products, and that package of products, typically, if it's on a finance agreement, is wrapped around a monthly payment, and then becomes around affordability to the customer. They haven't necessarily gone in at that point to buy a car thinking, I've got to have my paint protection, I've got to have my gap insurance. But I understand as well the need and the requirement as businesses to have them in there because of the profit opportunities that they obviously represent. I think from a consumer online, keeping it simple is probably the best method, and taking away, as you say, those barriers to purchase that say, well, actually, do I need to now consider this, or is this something that perhaps is almost a post-purchase consideration?
Who's doing it well at the moment, and why are they successful?
We've got a lot of clients that certainly not just in the current COVID-19 crisis, but pre that really have embraced online. And when I say embraced it, they've embraced it from the point of view of it has to be around culture, and it has to be around really, being driven from the top, being driven from the main stakeholders and shareholders in those businesses that sort of understand the concept that certain consumers will want to buy in a completely different way. I think what we're seeing in the current climate is that that's going to fast track, that's going to only sort of increase in terms of time. So the ones that really embrace the solution, they make their teams fully aware of it. We do an awful lot of training, competency training, obviously, on the solutions when we launch them. We do particularly in-depth workshops around the solution functionality. And for us, it's very much about if you use the functionality to its best, they'll get the best out of it, and then they'll start to see those results. And we're seeing fantastic results across the platform at the moment. You're
seeing companies come out like Kazoo now and other options like that, where they don't actually have a physical site. I mean, how important in the future is having a dealership going to be to selling cars?
Good question, that one, James, and I'm sure that there are many people in the industry, senior leaders, and probably even OEMs to that point that certainly will be having that discussion at the moment, is that, what part does the bricks and mortar play now within, the changing landscape, the new modern world of consumer buying. I think there will always be a place for dealerships. I've been brought up in them through the sort of the years that I've been involved in the industry. But I think they've got to take on probably a completely different life form, and they've got to take on certainly a different way in which they operate. And I think one of the things we've got to do as an industry is we've got to be accepting of online. We've got to be accepting of e-commerce. I think all too often what we've done as an industry certainly prior to the crisis, is we've probably fought it, and we've probably fought it in such a way because, I've got a gym palace, I've got hungry salesmen to feed, I've got people at the end of the day that I need to come into this business to make it functional and operate and keep the lights on. So I think there will always be a need for dealerships. I think it's in terms of functionality and certainly probably structure and infrastructure of teams and staffs within those businesses. I think that's where the rethink has got to take place.
I mean, online is going to be incredibly important in the short and mid-term as we get back to work. I take it you're seeing a huge demand off the back of that at GForces.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, and I think Tim raised this at the last session, unprecedented demand for our platform really in the last 8 weeks. Over 400% increase in sales month on month. But it's not just around the increase in people that are interested in the platform and interested in online. It's what we're seeing in terms of the transactions that are taking place across that. I mean, just to give you an idea, so we will see in May versus April over 165% increase in online transactions across our live clients, like for like, of those 2 months. Phenomenal growth. And people would say, well, you're bound to see that, aren't you? Because dealerships are shut. But what we are starting to see is the metrics that are driving that are really quite interesting. We've seen a 15% increase in average transaction price on vehicles. Our average transaction price running this month is £16,500. So, we're talking about here transactions that are taking place for large ticket items. These aren't sort of 4 or 5 grand used cars that are going through on the online platforms. They're people that are buying, in a sense, big chunks of metal. And one of the things we're definitely seeing is we're seeing a huge increase in conversion in the checkout. 300% increase we've seen month on month. And that's only, in our opinion, going to increase, as more people get more in tune with the fact that these solutions are actually out there and in the marketplace.
I'm interested to know what you think is coming up next. I mean, GForces has been incredibly innovative when it comes to their solutions that have been providing dealers. But I mean, for example, I was on the Apple app the other day looking at a new MacBook Pro. I could press it and put it onto the worktop there in augmented reality, walk all the way around it as though it was there. Incredible piece of technology. I mean, okay, we're talking Apple with the billions they've got, but surely those sorts of technologies can trickle down into the car world. I mean, have you seen anything like that could be coming?
Yeah, but I mean, you mentioned Apple. I mean, we've enabled in the last 5 weeks Apple Pay and Google Pay through our checkout process, and it's staggering the amount of traction we're already starting to see with that in terms of the transactions that come through, whether it be a simple reserve or a pay in full. One of the things we're very, very keen to focus on as we develop the tech out further is really continuing to focus on joining that online and that offline effect interaction with the consumer. And the way we do that is we do it through the My Account area. And the My Account area plays an absolutely fundamental part of being able to see that browsing visibility once the customer's actually been on your website, interacted with a vehicle on the vehicle details page, perhaps configured quotation. And we've got a very, very clearly defined roadmap of things that we're going to develop with the solution as we come down the line. One of the things that really probably has got to advance in terms of technological thinking, and it's not necessarily us driving this, it's the lenders. We deal with pretty much every single one of the lenders across the whole of the UK automotive space. But when you look at where they're at in terms of their technology offering, certainly around things like documents, distance selling documents, the ability to remote sign, the minute that these guys start to deliver this technology out to us, it's simple. We can embed that into our platform, just that improves and makes that customer experience, even more digitalized and even more transparent.
What about artificial intelligence, machine learning? Is that going to play a part in car dealer websites?
I think, I mean, if, it could do, absolutely it could do, but one of the things that probably is going to play an even more important part is automation of marketing. And when we say automation of marketing, that's really giving the platform the ability to send out automated offers to customers through obviously the My Account area, to allow dealers to, to in a sense, load what types of offers that they want actually at certain periods of time, and really wrap it around really quite a cohesive CRM strategy that says, yeah, at this certain date, at this certain time, we want to send this communication to a customer that's perhaps in the funnel and thinking about buying a car. So automation will play an absolute key part in what we do. And
what about the tools that dealers really need to consider? I mean, what are the absolute key things that they should be putting in place on their website?
So again, I think this has been touched on in some of your other sessions. So if I was to draw up a bit of a wish list of things that they need to put on a website, absolutely got to have finance quotation capability. Most customers will now go on a website and expect to be able to understand what the monthly payment is on a vehicle. You've got to serve up part exchange valuation. It can be a bit of a grey area for people in terms of their consideration. There's a lot of nervousness around serving up customers instant value of part exchange, but there's certainly ways in which it can be done that can take the risk off the table from the retailer's perspective. You've got to give customers the opportunity to apply online, apply for finance online, but do it in such a way that it's actually within the native platform. And our tech does this. We're able to serve the decision back of that finance application, that credit decision, into the dealer's website, so that the customer gets to see that. So for example, an instant acceptance on finance would come directly back into the dealer platform. No need to go off to separate portals, or no need to go off and look at it from that perspective.
Because there will be a lot of dealers that would see sending them off into customers off into different areas as an easy solution, perhaps. Just how important is it to have it all done in that dealer website? I know you sort of touched on it, but I mean, does that give customers the confidence to continue with their purchase?
I think if you think about how other industries and other industries that do it well, the confidence around buying is very much that. Does everything that the consumer needs on that website, is it served up in step processes in a clear, concise and transparent way that, just as you said, gives the customer, the consumer, the trust and the confidence to be able to transact online? And I think the minute that you start taking customers off of the dealer web domain and you start taking them off to different URLs, that perhaps puts elements of doubt in the customer's mind as to, well, why I was browsing on one particular dealer website, why am I now browsing on X? And how do I get back from X to the dealer website? And actually, if I'm on X and I'm inputting my personal data, how safe and secure is that personal data? Because I've been taken away from the original platform that I started browsing on. So, and that, if you think about it, there's a bit of common sense applied to that. And as a consumer looking at it, and a consumer that wants that trust and transparency, that's what you've got to serve up to them.
I mean, I get even a little bit concerned when a PayPal thing pops up on a website, or even when my bank serves up the fact that they're checking the transaction. Sometimes that worries me a little bit. So, and I'm sure when you're purchasing something as big as a car, you've got to eliminate that completely.
You've got to eliminate it in such a way that it gives that, again, that trust, that empathy, that confidence to transact. But it's got to be done in such a way as well that it's not confusing to the customer. We've tried to make our UX, our journey, our consumer journey through the whole checkout process as seamless, as simple and as easy to navigate through as possible. And actually, we've had some really good feedback on that, certainly from not just our clients, but some of the reviews that we're seeing on some of the client sites from a customer perspective as well.
Paul, is there a pattern to when people shop online for cars?
We're seeing it definitely. It's quite interesting actually. So pre-COVID, 56% of our transactions were being outside of traditional dealer hours. And you think, yeah, I get that. That's browsing time. That's evening browsing time. And of those 56% of transactions, 80% of them are being done between 7 and 11 p.m. Quite interestingly, though, during the COVID-19 crisis, that's actually dropped now to 44%. People have got more time on their hands. They're at home. We're seeing a lot more transactions that come through, obviously during a normal given day. But what's quite interesting as well, what we're starting to see is that, and again, I go back to my days in the industry, you'd always gear yourself up for Saturdays and Sundays as your best selling day. Online, Saturdays and Sundays are completely the opposite. And we're starting to assimilate now data around, days that are going to be good days in terms of transaction. We can almost forecast out now that a Monday and a Thursday is going to be the strongest day through a given 7-day week. And we are starting to see those patterns.
And that's not dealer specific, that's across the industry.
That's dealers that we've actually got live on our platform, of which we've got over 100 of them now.
So what would be your key kind of takeaway points, Paul, to someone running a dealership who hasn't set up their online solution yet? I mean, what would be your key takeaway points for those sorts of people?
I think the one thing to perhaps consider first, foremost than anything, is you've got to understand that consumer buying habits have changed. And there's got to be an absolute realization that they have changed. Well, they were changing pre-COVID. They've probably changed even more now. And let's be honest, they're probably not going to go back to how they were pre-COVID as well. If anything, the conditioning of other industries, what we've had to do as individuals, in terms of buying online, getting us through this pandemic crisis. So I think there has to be an acceptance of that, an acceptance of that there's got to be a different choice and a different offering to the customer in terms of the way with which they can transact with you. We talked about as well, structure of those businesses. I think there's got to be an awful lot of consideration in terms of the inquiry when it comes into the business, how that inquiry is handled and the type of competency that's required attached to that inquiry to make sure that it's dealt with in the right and most proficient manner. And I think the other thing as well is handover of vehicle home delivery. Home delivery pre-COVID was almost, we don't offer home delivery because we don't believe in it. We're not set up for it. There's a cost attached to it. Home delivery is just going to become a requirement now. It's as simple as that. And what retailers have got to do is they've got to get their head around that. They've got to understand how they can cope with home delivery. They've not got to be scared of the distance selling regs. They've got to embrace those. And again, if you take a simplistic view of it, you're selling product anyway that you should be selling with, a complete stamp of approval. There's so many regulations attached now to how vehicles need to be prepared. There's certain governance attached to that. That's just got to be a given within any business that, consumers are going to expect home delivery. And that, again, probably requires thought, structure and process in terms of, who's going to deal with those customers that actually require that. Is it a handover company that you need to add to? Is it perhaps training within the team in terms of realignment of resource? Do you need to have handover specialists? Do you need to go out, as Peter mentioned on one of his, go out and buy trucks in a sense that, are now going to fulfill this home delivery requirement?
It's certainly going to change the way that the dealers are going to be selling forever. I mean, would you agree with that?
I don't think, James, and you would say this, probably, I don't think that we're going to go back to the way that it was prior to the crisis. I really don't. I think this is a paradigm shift in terms of the industry. I think this is probably making people have a stark realization that they've got to assess their business model. They've got to take a long, hard hold look at how they trade, and they've got to put strategies in place to deal with that.
And finally, Paul, what's the most important thing this crisis has taught you personally?
I knew you were going to ask this, so a lot of thought and consideration has gone into this one actually. So two things. So on a personal note, I've had the benefit of having such an amazing, secure and family infrastructure around me with my wife and the children, and probably never worked as hard in my life. Back-to-back Zoom calls on a day, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without the support of obviously my wife, and really, really grateful for that. Plus, as well, we've had to factor in homeschooling, childcare, etc., and all that type of thing. So I think having that support infrastructure around me has taught not to take things for granted. And I think from a business point of view, there's three things really: strategy, communication, and teamwork. We've worked extensively as a business in the last really 8 weeks in delivering what I'm going to say are phenomenal results. And we've only done that by those three key areas.
Paul, I think you well know I'm a big fan of what you do at GForces and the rest of the team. I wish you the best of luck for the future, and I'm sure this success is going to continue as the industry changes and people get back to work on June the 1st. So thank you for giving up your time today.
Now, thanks for that, James. And again, can I just thank on behalf of us, I'm sure all the viewers and people, your other guests, sterling work that you're doing. Great to see this across the industry, so keep that up as well.
Thanks, Paul. You can definitely come back saying nice things like that. So thank you very much to Paul for that. Next week, we've got some brilliant guests lined up. On Monday, I'm chatting to Kazana's CEO, Tom Wood, and Director of Insights, Rupert Pontin. We're going to be talking about used car prices, which are changing on a day-to-day basis. Huge amounts of change there. On Tuesday, it's Hendy's chairman, Paul Hendy. Wednesday, I'm chatting to the supercar dealer, Tom Hartley, which would be an entertaining one. On Thursday, Sangyong's Nick Laird and chairman Jim Tyrrell will be joining me. And on Friday, I've got Pendragon's CEO, Bill Burnham, in his first interview in the UK. So if you want to get involved in Car Dealer Live like those guys, you can email me, james@blackbullmedia.co.uk. Get me on Twitter, @CarDealerEd, or on LinkedIn, and send me a message there. And if you want any breaking news, send direct to your phone. I've set up a Car Dealer WhatsApp group. Just send me an email and I'll send you a link to get involved. Full schedule for Car Dealer Live can be found on our website. It's planned a lot further than that next week. So if you want to go and find out some more and who's coming up, have a look at cardealermagazine.co.uk. Thanks once again to Paul for joining me. Have a fantastic weekend and I'll see you on Monday. Goodbye.